The boy raised his hand the way children raise their hands when they are about to say something they have been told never to say. It was the end of art period, the room half empty, glue drying in little white ridges on 22 sheets of construction paper, and Miss Calloway was crouched beside the smallest desk in the second-grade classroom because the smallest desk belonged to the smallest worry she had. Eli Hale had drawn a house. He had drawn it carefully, with a blue door and a crooked porch and a purple smudge of a bush near the steps. But he had not drawn anyone inside it. He had drawn his family on the lawn instead, 2 stick figures standing on the grass, and beside them, 2 little rectangles she finally recognized as suitcases. "It's a nice house, Eli," she said. "Why don't you put yourself inside it? You could draw your room." The boy looked at the picture for a long time. Then he looked at her, and his voice dropped to the careful register children use when they are quoting an adult exactly. "We can't put nails in the walls," he said, "and I'm not supposed to draw it like it's ours. My mom says we're just borrowing the house." Miss Calloway smiled because that is what you do. And then he told her the street. He told her about the blue door and the porch board that wobbled, the one his mom always told him to step over. He told her about the lilac bush his mom said an old lady must have planted a long time ago, because lilacs take years. He told her the name of the street was Linden, and the house was the gray one near the corner, and she should never tell anyone where they lived, because if she did, a man might come and they would have to leave before Friday. The smile stayed on her face. She had a great deal of practice keeping her face still. But somewhere underneath it, very quietly, the floor of Miss Calloway's life began to give way. Because the lilac on Linden Street had been planted by her grandmother, by hand, on a spring afternoon 30 years before this little boy was born. Because the porch board had wobbled for as long as she could remember, and her grandmother had always meant to fix it and never had. Because the gray house with the blue door near the corner of Linden Street belonged to her. It had belonged to her for 2 years, ever since the funeral. And on every single statement the property company had sent her in those 2 years, in the same flat black ink, was the same single word: vacant. What this little boy did not know, what his mother had spent 14 months praying no one would ever find out, was that the woman kneeling on the classroom floor beside his desk was the owner of the house his family had been hiding in. And what the woman did not yet know, but was about to spend 3 weeks uncovering, was that someone had been quietly stealing from both of them at the same time, keeping them frightened, keeping them silent, keeping them in separate rooms of the same lie so that neither one would ever say a word. A 7-year-old had just said the word. Stay with me to the end of this one, because the moment a frightened single mother finally learns who has been sitting across from her son all year, and the moment a smooth, smiling man's whole operation comes apart over one child's drawing, is the kind of moment that reminds you how much the truth can rebuild when somebody finally lets it out. The morning of the day all of this began had started, as most of Robin Hale's mornings started, with arithmetic. She did the arithmetic before her feet touched the floor. She did it in the dark, lying on the mattress in the front room of the gray house, listening to the furnace tick and groan the way it had ticked and groaned all winter. Rent was due in 9 days. She had $140 in an envelope taped behind the cereal boxes and a shift at the diner that would bring 60 more if the tips were kind, and a Thursday night cleaning the dental office downtown that would bring 40. And if she was careful, if nothing broke, if Eli didn't outgrow his shoes for another 2 weeks, she would have enough to hand the man the cash on the first and breathe again until the next first came around. She was 31 years old, and she had been doing this arithmetic for so long that it ran underneath her thoughts like a second heartbeat. She got up. She moved through the house quietly the way she always moved, because the house was not the kind of thing you stomped around in. The house was a privilege. She reminded herself of that every day, the way some people remind themselves to be grateful for their health. A 2-bedroom house with a yard in the good school district, for less than half what a place like it should cost. That did not happen to women like Robin Hale. That had happened to her exactly once, in the parking lot of a laundromat 18 months ago, when a man in a clean gray jacket had overheard her on the phone fighting with a landlord about a deposit, and had stepped over and had smiled, and had said he might be able to help. His name was Royce Mallard. He ran a property company, he said. He had a place sitting empty, a nice place. The owner was elderly and difficult and just wanted it occupied and looked after. No big application. No credit check digging up the eviction from when Eli's father left and the lease fell apart. Just cash, First of the month, kept quiet, kept simple. Favor, really. A handshake instead of 100 pages. The owner's a private person, he had told her. Doesn't want a sign in the yard, doesn't want neighbors talking, doesn't want a paper trail that ends up in some database. You keep your head down, you keep it clean, you pay me on the first, and you've got the best deal in this city. But I need you to understand something. He had leaned in then, kind as anything. You're not really a tenant. There's no lease. So you don't have a tenant's protections, and I don't have a landlord's headaches. You're a guest. You're borrowing it. The day that stops working for the owner, it stops. Could be years. Could be Friday. You good with that? She had been so good with that she had nearly cried in the laundromat. So she had taught Eli the rules the way other mothers taught their children to look both ways. Don't put nails in the walls. Don't tell your friends it's ours because it isn't. Don't get too attached to your room, baby, because we're just borrowing it and borrowed things go back. She had said it gently every time, the way you press on a bruise so the child learns where it hurts before the world presses harder. She had believed she was protecting him. She had believed she was lucky. She had no idea she was being robbed. Mom! Eli appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks, hair standing up, one shoelace already untied on a shoe he wasn't wearing. He was small for 7 and serious in the way that children get serious when they have learned that the grown-up in their life is carrying something heavy. Is today a borrowing day or a keeping day? It was their joke. It had started as a way to make the rules less frightening, and now it was just a thing they said. Every day's a borrowing day, bud, she said, and slid the one good mug across the counter to him. The white one with the chip in the handle, the only mug in the house that had survived 3 moves, which Eli had decided years ago was the family mug and treated like an heirloom. She poured his juice into it. But today's also a pancake day, so it's not all bad. He climbed onto the stool. He drank his juice from the family mug with both hands. And while she stood at the stove turning pancakes that were mostly flour and hope, he told her very seriously that today in school they were drawing their houses, and he wasn't sure how to draw a house you were only borrowing. She didn't turn around right away. She let the pancake brown. Draw it from outside, she said. Houses look the same from outside whether you're keeping them or borrowing them. Nobody can tell the difference from the sidewalk. She thought that was a good answer. She thought it was even a kind of wisdom. She did not know that her son would take it literally and stand his whole family out on the lawn with their suitcases, and that a teacher he loved would look at that drawing and recognize her own grandmother's lilac bush. Eleanor Calloway, Nell, to the 3 people left alive who were allowed to call her that, had become a teacher for the same reason some people become lighthouse keepers. She liked being the steady thing in a place where small creatures were trying to find their way through weather. She was 44. She had taught 2nd grade for 19 years at Wren Hollow Elementary, long enough that she now had students whose parents she had also taught, long enough that the principal, a calm and formidable woman named Ms. Adebayo, considered her less an employee than a load-bearing wall. Nell noticed things. It was the only real skill she would admit to having. She noticed which child had stopped eating breakfast at home because they ate the free cafeteria one like it was the only sure meal of the day. She noticed which child flinched at a raised voice and which one flinched at a gentle one. She noticed, in October, that Eli Hale put 2 crackers in his pocket at snack time every single day and never ate them, and when she gently asked why, he'd said, "In case," and would not explain in case of what. She noticed that Eli got very quiet around the word moving. She noticed he never invited anyone over. She noticed he drew the same gray house over and over in the margins of his worksheets, with a little sign on the door that, when she'd finally leaned close enough to read it, said in shaky pencil, "Do not nail." She had been a teacher long enough to know the shape of a family that was holding its breath. She did not yet know the cause. She had simply filed Eli under the children she watched a little more carefully, the way she'd watched a few dozen others over the years. What she had not told anyone at Wren Hollow, what she barely told herself, was that 2 years earlier she had inherited a house, and that the house had broken something in her that hadn't healed. It was her grandmother's house on Linden Street. Nell had practically been raised in it. Her own parents had been the kind of people who were always somewhere else, and Gran had been the one who stayed. The kitchen with the yellow curtains. The porch with the board that wobbled. The lilac bush that perfumed the whole street for 2 weeks every May and then dropped its blossoms all at once like it couldn't be bothered to do anything halfway. When Gran died, the house came to Nell, and Nell discovered she could not do a single thing with it. She couldn't live in it. Every room was an ambush of memory. She couldn't sell it. Selling it felt like selling the woman herself. So when a man named Royce Mallard had reached out, referred, he'd said, by a colleague at the title company who'd handled the estate, and offered to manage it for her, to find a quiet long-term tenant, to handle everything so she never had to set foot in that grief again, she had said yes the way drowning people say yes to anything that floats. And then she had simply not looked. That was the part she was ashamed of. Later, the statements came quarterly. Vacant. Soft rental market. Recommend holding. Furnace flagged. Repairs pending. No income this period. She read them in 30 seconds and filed them and did not think about the house, because thinking about the house meant thinking about the kitchen with the yellow curtains, and she did not have the strength for the kitchen with the yellow curtains. Twice a year, a small check. Most periods, nothing, and an apology in flat black ink about the difficult market and the difficult furnace and the difficult owner. Wait, no, she was the owner. The man just had a way of writing as though the difficulties were weather, as though no one in particular were responsible for them. She had trusted him completely, because trusting him let her not look at the house. For 2 years, Nell Calloway had paid a man to keep her from her own grief. And for 14 of those months, without her knowing, a single mother and a little boy had been living inside that grief, sleeping in Gran's rooms, stepping over Gran's wobbly board, smelling Gran's lilacs in May, handing a man cash on the first of every month and being told they were lucky to be borrowing a house that no one, according to every statement Nell ever received, lived in at all. The art project was on a Tuesday. Nell collected the drawings the way she always did, holding each one up, finding the true thing in it to praise, because every child's drawing has a true thing in it if you're willing to look. And then she came to Eli's, and the true thing in it stopped her where she stood. The blue door, the crooked porch, the purple smudge by the steps that any other teacher would have called a flower and moved on, the 2 figures on the lawn with their suitcases, and the little sign on the door, "Do not nail." She did not let her face change. She had a great deal of practice. She crouched beside his desk, and she asked him, gently, the questions that ended with the word Linden and the word Friday and the bottom dropping out of everything she thought she understood about her own life. That night she did something she had not done in 2 years. She drove to Linden Street. It was full dark by the time she turned onto it, and her hands were not entirely steady on the wheel, and she told herself the whole way that the boy was confused, that lots of houses had blue doors, that lilacs were common, that she was a tired woman pattern-matching her own sadness onto a child's crayon drawing. Then she came around the corner and saw her grandmother's house with the lights on. There was a child's bicycle leaning against the porch. There were curtains in the windows, not Gran's yellow ones, new ones, cheap and clean and carefully hung. There was the warm yellow glow of a kitchen where someone was making dinner, and the blue flicker of a small television, and the unmistakable, undeniable, impossible fact of a home where her statements insisted there was nothing at all. She parked across the street and turned off her engine and sat in the dark and watched a life happen inside a house that, on paper, no one had ever entered. A woman crossed in front of the kitchen window. Slim, tired, hair pulled back, moving the way exhausted people move, with economy, never a wasted step. A boy ran past her. Eli, unmistakably Eli, in pajamas, holding something white in both hands, a mug maybe, running it carefully like it was precious. The woman said something and the boy laughed, and even through the glass and the distance and the dark, Nell could see that whatever was wrong in that house, it was not love. There was plenty of love. There was a mother and a son and a chipped mug and new curtains hung in someone else's grief. There was just also, somewhere, a lie. And the lie did not belong to them. Nell drove home and did not sleep, and at 6 in the morning she pulled 2 years of property statements out of the drawer she'd been filing them in without reading them, and she spread them across her kitchen table, and for the first time she actually read them. Vacant. 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 No income this period. Vacant. Furnace repair pending, $1,400. Charge to owner reserve. Vacant. Recommend continued hold. 14 months of vacant for a house with curtains in the windows and a bicycle on the porch and a boy running through it in his pajamas. She found her old laptop. She pulled up the bank account the management company deposited into. Across 2 years, against the $1,400 they charged her for a furnace she now suspected had never been touched, against the small apologetic checks and the long apologetic dry spells, she found the shape of a hole. Not money taken in big obvious bites. Money that had simply never arrived. A house that should have brought in something every month, bringing in almost nothing year after year, while a single mother somewhere inside it counted out cash into an envelope behind the cereal boxes. Nell Calloway was not a detective. She was a second-grade teacher who noticed things. But noticing things, it turns out, is the whole of it. She did not call the management company in anger. She had learned, over 19 years of parent-teacher conferences, that anger announces itself and gives the other side time to arrange their story. So she called the way a confused, slightly helpless homeowner calls, and she let her voice be small. She got Royce Mallard on the third try. His voice was warm and unhurried and immediately, instinctively, perfectly reassuring, and that was the thing that frightened her most, because it was the voice of a man who had reassured a great many worried people for a great many years. "Ms. Calloway, good to hear from you. Everything all right?" "I think so," she said. "I was just looking at the statements, finally. I know I'm terrible, I never look, and I wanted to ask about the house. It's still empty." A small pause. Half a second. She would not have caught it a week ago. Still empty, unfortunately. There's a tough rental in that pocket. The furnace situation didn't help. "We had some interest in the fall, but nothing that penciled out for you." He said, "For you, the way a man says a thing he wants you to feel grateful for. Honestly, between us, I've been wondering if you wouldn't be better served just selling. I could line that up. Take it off your plate entirely. I know the place has a lot of memories for you." There it was. "I know the place has a lot of memories for you." He had handed her the exact reason she'd avoided the house, and offered to take the house away, in the same breath, so smoothly that 2 years ago she'd have wept with relief. "Maybe," she said. "I'll think about it. Would it be possible to walk through it? Before I decide? I haven't been inside since Grand passed." The pause was longer this time. "I'd hold off on that," he said, and the warmth had a new edge underneath it. The edge of a man steering a car away from a cliff the passenger hasn't noticed. It's a little embarrassing. We had some squatters get in over the winter. Vagrants. We're dealing with it, it's a whole legal process, you don't want to be anywhere near it for the liability. Could get ugly. Let me clear it out and clean it up, and then I'll walk you through a nice empty house and we'll talk about listing it." Sound good? Squatters. Vagrants. The boy in the pajamas. The mother who never wasted a step. The curtains hung with such care. "That sounds good," Nell heard herself say. "Thank you, Royce. You always make things so easy." "That's the job," he said, pleased. "You just leave it to me." She hung up and sat very still for a long time, the way you sit still after you've stepped off a curb you didn't see and your whole body has caught up to the fact that the ground was lower than you thought. Then she started writing things down. She wrote everything down. It was the only thing she knew how to do. She was a person who graded, who documented, who kept a record because a record was the only fair thing. She made a timeline. She listed every statement and what it claimed. She wrote down the date and time of the call and the exact word squatters and vagrants, and I'd hold off on that. She drove past Linden Street twice more, never stopping long, and wrote down the bicycle and the curtains and the light in the kitchen. And she did one more thing. She went to see an old friend. Diane Okafor, no relation to the principal, the two women had laughed about the coincidence for 15 years, was a real estate attorney who had once had a daughter in Nell's class and had never forgotten the year Nell had quietly fed that daughter breakfast every morning without ever mentioning it to anyone. Diane took Nell's spreadsheet and her timeline and her recording of the call. Nell had, on Diane's earlier advice and her state's one-party consent law, recorded the second conversation, and Diane read it all with the expression of a woman watching a slow car accident she could already see the end of. "Nell," she said finally, "do you understand what you've found? I think someone's been lying to me about my house. Someone has been renting your house out from under you and pocketing every dime, and reporting it vacant so you never went looking, for at least a year, probably longer." Diane tapped the furnace line. "And charging you for repairs that I'd bet my license never happened. There's a word for it. It's called rent skimming, and depending on the amounts and the paperwork, it's not just a contract problem. It's fraud. possibly theft. And the part that makes it work, the genius of it, the truly ugly genius, is right here. She pointed at Nell's note, the one quoting Eli. We're just borrowing the house. If we tell, a man comes and we have to leave before Friday. He's keeping the tenant terrified, Diane said quietly. No lease, cash only. You're just borrowing it. Be grateful. Keep your mouth shut or you're out by Friday. That's not a kindness. That's a leash. A tenant with a lease has rights, talks to people, knows their landlord's name. A tenant who thinks she's getting away with something, who thinks she's borrowing, who thinks one wrong word means the street, that tenant never talks to anyone. She protects the very man who's robbing her. And she keeps the owner from ever finding out, because the owner thinks the house is empty. Diane sat back. He built a wall down the middle of your house. The family on one side, you on the other, and him standing in the gap collecting from both ends. Neither of you ever sees him do it, because neither of you is allowed to talk to the other one. A little boy talked to me, Nell said. Diane looked at her for a moment. Yeah, she said softly. I'd imagine that wasn't part of the plan. The trouble was that the man in the gap had begun to feel the floor shift too. Royce Mallard had not survived 11 years of doing what he did by being stupid. He had a feel for it, the way a spider feels a touch on the far edge of the web. And a homeowner who had not looked at a statement in 2 years suddenly calling to read them, suddenly asking to walk through a house she'd spent 2 years avoiding. That was a touch on the far edge of the web. He didn't know what had moved. He didn't need to. He knew only that the safest thing, when the owner started asking questions, was to make the inconvenient tenant disappear before the two of them could ever stand in the same room. So on the first of the month, when Robin Hale handed him the envelope, $180, every cent of it counted 3 times, Royce Mallard did not smile the way he usually smiled. The owner's selling, he said. I told you this could happen. Robin felt the floor of her own life tilt. When? Soon. Could be quick. He folded the envelope into his jacket without counting it, which he had never done before, and the not counting frightened her more than anything he could have said. Listen, I went to bat for you. Told them you've been a good guest. But they want it empty and clean to show, and the rent's going up anyway. Market's moved, I can't keep doing you this favor forever. $250 starting next month if you want to stay through the listing. Cash, same as always. $250? She did the arithmetic and the arithmetic came back with no answer. Royce, I can't. I barely make the 180. Where am I supposed to find another 70 a month by next week? He shrugged, kind as a man can be while taking everything. Not my call, Robin. I'm just the messenger. You knew the deal going in. No lease, no promises. You've had a great run. He turned to go, then turned back, and now the kindness had a point on it. And do me a favor, don't go talking to anybody about your situation here. People hear no lease, paying cash. They make trouble, they call the city, and then it gets ugly for everybody. You especially. You don't want anybody looking too hard at how you've been living. Do you? With the boy. And there it was, the leash given a small sharp tug. You don't want anybody looking too hard. With the boy. The thing she was most afraid of in the world, that someone would decide she wasn't doing right by Eli, used like a hand on the back of her neck. Robin Hale said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that there was nothing to say to a man like that. She walked back into the gray house and stood in the kitchen with the new curtains, and she did the arithmetic again and again, and it would not come out. And Eli found her there 20 minutes later still standing, and he put his small hand in hers and said, Is it a borrowing day or a leaving day? And she heard, in her own son's voice, the thing she had taught him, and she understood for the first time, with a kind of horror, that she had taught him to expect to lose everything, and that he had learned it perfectly. 3 days later, a sheet of paper appeared taped to the blue door. It was made to look official. It had a county-looking seal printed crooked in the corner, and a lot of bold words. Notice and vacate and failure to comply, and a date 11 days out. It was not real. It had not come from any court. It had come from a printer in Royce Mallard's office, designed to do one job. Make a frightened woman pack her car in the night and vanish before anyone official ever spoke to her. Robin found it after the diner shift, in the dark, and her knees went out, and she sat down on the wobbly porch board with the fake notice in her hands and let herself cry for exactly as long as it took Eli's bus to come around the corner. Then she folded the paper into her pocket, and wiped her face and stood up, and was a mother again by the time the doors hissed open. But she made one decision sitting on that board. She decided that if they were going to take the house, she was at least going to do right by the one person who had been kind to her son all year. There was a parent-teacher conference on the schedule, the kind she usually dreaded and dodged. She had blown off the fall one because she'd had a shift. She would not blow off this one. Whatever else was falling apart. She would walk into that school and look Eli's teacher in the eye and thank her, because Miss Calloway had been the only steady thing in Eli's whole jagged year, and Robin Hale paid her debts even when she could pay nothing else. She had absolutely no idea whose hand she was about to shake. The conference was at 4 o'clock on a Thursday, in a classroom that smelled like crayons and the particular industrial floral cleaner that all schools everywhere are mopped with. Nell had spent the afternoon with her stomach in a knot, because she knew who was coming, and her visitor did not. Robin Hale walked in still in her diner clothes because there had been no time to change, apologizing before she was fully through the door, apologizing for the fall conference, apologizing for Eli's drawing if it had been a problem, apologizing for being a little late, apologizing the way people apologize when they have learned to apologize preemptively for their entire existence so that no one beats them to it. "Please," Nell said. "Sit. There's nothing to apologize for. Eli is one of the best things about my year." And Robin Hale stopped and looked at her, and something in her face came undone for just a second, because no one had told her that her son was the best thing about anything in a very long time. They talked about Eli first because that was the honest thing and the kind thing both. Nell told her the true things, that he was gentle, that he was sharp, that he shared without being asked, that he had a way of noticing when another kid was sad and quietly sitting near them. She did not, at first, mention the crackers in the pocket. She did not mention the drawing of the suitcases. She let the mother have 10 minutes of hearing only that her child was loved and good, because she sensed the woman needed it the way Eli had needed his free breakfast, not as charity, but as a true meal that happened to be free. Then, gently, she said, "Can I ask you something, and you can tell me it's none of my business? I worry about a couple of things with Eli. Small things. He keeps food in his pocket. He gets very quiet when we talk about anything changing. And his drawing the house with the suitcases. I just want to make sure he's okay. That you're okay." And Robin Hale, who had not told the truth to a single living soul in 14 months, who had carried it alone behind the cereal boxes and the new curtains and the fake notice folded in her pocket. Robin Hale looked at this calm, kind woman in this safe-smelling room and felt the truth come up in her throat like water finding the lowest place. She didn't tell all of it, but she told enough. She told her they were renting privately, cash, no lease, a deal a man had given her because nobody else would. She told her the owner was selling and the rent was going up and she couldn't make it and they might have to leave fast, and that was why she taught Eli they were only borrowing it so it wouldn't break him when it went. She told her, and here her voice failed and she pushed through it, that she was scared all the time, that someone would decide she was a bad mother for living the way they lived, and that the man who'd given them the house had reminded her, just this week, that someone might look too hard at her if she ever talked. "So I don't talk," Robin said. "I don't talk to anybody. I don't know why I'm talking to you." She laughed, wet and embarrassed, and wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. You have a way. Eli says you notice things. I guess you do." Nell sat with it. She had practiced keeping her face still for 19 years, and she used every bit of that practice now, because what she was feeling was not something a frightened woman should have to manage on top of everything else. She was feeling the full shape of it land. The man in the gap, the wall down the middle of her own house, the leash, the family on one side and herself on the other, both of them paying, both of them afraid, neither one ever allowed to know the other existed. She was feeling rage, clean and cold and enormous, and it was not pointed at the woman across the small table. It was pointed at a man in a clean gray jacket who had stood in the gap and collected. She made a decision in that moment, and it would have surprised the version of herself from 2 years ago, the one who couldn't walk into her own kitchen. She decided not to tell Robin who she was. Not yet. Not here. Not like this. Not as a revelation dropped on an exhausted woman in her diner clothes at the end of a shift. Because if she said I own that house right now, in this room, the woman would die of shame, would assume she'd been caught, would assume the kind teacher had been the trap all along, and the thing Royce Mallard had built, the wall of fear, would simply transfer itself to Nell. The woman would never trust her again. So instead Nell said, quietly, "Can I tell you something? I had a grandmother who used to say that borrowing and keeping aren't decided by the person holding the thing. They're decided by the person who owns it. And sometimes the owner decides differently than you'd expect." Robin looked at her, not understanding, because there was no way she could understand. "What I mean is," Nell said, "before you pack a single box, will you let me make one phone call? I know some people. About housing, about your rights. There may be more ground under you than you think you're standing on." She paused. "And whatever that man told you about somebody looking too hard at you, Robin, look at me. You walked off a shift to come tell your son's teacher the truth, because you wanted to thank her. I have been doing this for 19 years. I know what a good mother looks like. He used your love for that boy as a weapon against you. That's the thing I want you to hear most. Not that you've done something wrong. That somebody figured out exactly how much you love your kid, and used it to keep you quiet." Robin Hale did not cry that time. She had cried enough. She just nodded once, the way you nod when someone names the thing you have carried alone for so long that you'd stopped believing it had a name. "Okay," she said. "One phone call." The phone call Nell made was not about Robin's rights, although later there would be plenty of those. The phone call Nell made was to Royce Mallard, and she made it sound, once again, like a confused and slightly helpless homeowner finally ready to give up. "You were right," she told him. "About selling. I drove past the house. I didn't go in, I know you said not to, and seeing it just made up my mind. I want it gone. Can we list it? Could we do a walkthrough next week? You said you'd clear out the squatter situation. I'd like to see it empty one last time before strangers start tromping through it. Closure, I suppose. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all," Royce said, and she could hear him smiling, hear the relief in it. Hear a man who thought the touch on the edge of the web had been a moth after all. "That's healthy. Tell you what. Give me till Thursday to get it cleaned out, and Thursday afternoon I'll meet you there myself. 4 o'clock, walk you through, and we'll get the paperwork rolling. You're doing the right thing." "Thursday at 4, Nell said. "I'll be there." She would be there. So would Diane Okafor. So, though Royce did not know it, would a quiet man named Officer Pell, a school resource officer Nell had worked beside for 6 years and trusted with her life, in plain clothes in a car across the street because Diane had said very precisely that what they were about to do should have a witness with a badge. And there was one more person who would be there, although she didn't yet know it either. Because the cruelest part of the plan, Royce clearing the house out by Thursday, meant only one thing for the Hale family. It meant they had until Thursday before the man came. Robin had been told to be out by the 11th, which gave her 4 more days, but on Tuesday afternoon Royce called and moved it up. "Owner wants a walk-through Thursday," he said. "Place needs to be empty. You've got till Wednesday night." "I'm sorry, Robin, this is how it goes. I'll come by Thursday morning to make sure it's clear." So Robin Hale spent Tuesday night and all of Wednesday doing the thing she had spent 14 months teaching her son to be ready for. She packed 2 suitcases and a laundry basket and 4 cardboard boxes from the back of the diner. She took the new curtains down because she'd paid for them and they were the one thing in that house that was actually hers. She wrapped the family mug, the white one with the chipped handle, in 3 of Eli's shirts and put it in the very center of a box where nothing could crush it. She did the whole thing with the terrible calm of a person who has rehearsed a loss so many times that when it finally comes it almost feels like relief, like a held breath let out. Eli helped. He was very good at it. That was the part that nearly broke her. How good he was at it. How he knew without being told which things mattered and which got left. How he stood his suitcases by the blue door exactly the way he'd drawn them on the lawn. 7 years old and already an expert at leaving. "It's okay, Mom," he told her, when he caught her standing still in the empty kitchen. It was a good house to borrow. She got them a room for Wednesday night at a motel out by the highway, the kind with a number on the door and a smell in the carpet, paid in cash, the last of the envelope. And on Thursday she had a plan of a sort. A friend from the diner, a couch for a week, time to find something, somewhere, somehow. She had done it before. She would do it again. She would always do it again for the boy. She did not plan to go back to the gray house at all. But Eli left Pepper. Not Pepper. There was no Pepper in this story. Eli left his crackers. The 2 crackers he kept in his pocket in case, and the small fierce ritual around them, and on Thursday morning at the motel he realized the emergency tin of crackers he kept in the kitchen cabinet of the gray house. The real stash, the thing that let him put only 2 in his pocket because he knew where the rest were, was still in the cabinet on Linden Street. He didn't tell his mother why it mattered. He couldn't have explained it. He only knew, with a 7-year-old's whole heart, that he could not leave it behind, that leaving it behind meant something he didn't have words for. And when Robin stepped out to the motel office at 3:45 to ask about a late checkout, Eli Hale, who was an expert at leaving and therefore an expert at the small grief inside leaving, slipped out the door and walked the 11 blocks back to the only house he'd ever felt safe in, to rescue the thing that had let him feel safe. Which is how, at 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, when Royce Mallard unlocked the blue door to walk a grieving homeowner through an empty house, the house was not empty. There was a boy in the kitchen on a chair, reaching for a tin of crackers in a high cabinet. Nell saw him first. She came through the blue door behind Royce, and there was her grandmother's hallway, and the place on the wall where the photograph of Gran's wedding had hung, and the doorway to the kitchen with the ghost of the yellow curtains. And there, framed in that doorway, balanced on a kitchen chair with his arms stretched up toward a high cabinet, was Eli Hale. Everything happened in the next 4 seconds, and Nell would remember every one of them for the rest of her life. Royce's voice, easy and warm, half a beat behind his eyes. Hey, kid, you can't be in here. And then the easiness draining out of it as he understood what the homeowner was seeing, as he understood that empty had a boy in it. His hand came up, hurting, steering, the way it had steered Robin and steered Nell for 2 years. This is the squatter situation. Ms. Calloway, I told you, they've been a nightmare. Let me handle this. Why don't you wait outside? Ms. Calloway? It was Eli. He had turned on the chair, the tin of crackers clutched against his chest, and he was looking at his teacher standing in the hallway of his house with an expression of total, uncomprehending astonishment. Ms. Calloway, what are you? This is my house. I mean, we're just borrowing it. You're not supposed to be here, the man. And then his eyes went to Royce, and his small body went rigid with a fear that no child should know how to feel, and he said in a whisper, The man comes. We have to leave before Friday. And Nell Calloway watched the whole thing finish assembling itself in front of her, in her grandmother's hallway, in the worst and most perfect possible place. The man, the leash, the wall, the family on one side and herself on the other, and now the wall coming down all at once because a 7-year-old had come back for his crackers. She did not yell. Diane had told her not to yell, and anyway she had 19 years of not yelling. She stepped past Royce Mallard, and she walked into her grandmother's kitchen, and she held out her hand to the boy on the chair. Eli, she said gently, it's okay. Come down off the chair, you'll fall. He came down because she was Miss Calloway and Miss Calloway was a safe thing. She steadied him with one hand. Then she straightened and she turned to Royce Mallard, and for the first time in 2 years her voice was not small at all. There's no squatter situation, she said. There's a family, a mother and a little boy. They've been paying you cash every month for over a year for a house you told me was empty. You've been keeping the rent. You've been charging me for a furnace you never touched. And you taught a child to be afraid of you so that he'd never tell a single adult where he lived. She tipped her head, almost curious. Did you know I was his teacher, Royce? You couldn't have. That's the part you couldn't plan for. You built the whole thing so the owner and the tenant would never meet, and you never imagined the owner would already know the child's name. Royce Mallard's face did several things very quickly. She watched the warmth come off it the way paint comes off in a fire. She watched him reach for the easy voice and not find it. Ms. Calloway, I don't know what this kid's been telling you, but I think you're confused about a complicated property. I have your call recorded, Nell said. The one where you told me the house was vacant and called this child a vagrant. I have 2 years of statements. I have a real estate attorney parked across the street who can explain the words rent skimming better than I can, and a police officer next to her who's been writing down license plates since 3:45. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. And I have the boy. Royce Mallard's hands, she noticed, were not steady. That was the moment Robin Hale appeared in the open doorway. She had come back for her son the instant she'd found the motel room empty, had driven the 11 blocks in a blind panic, had come up the walk in time to hear the last of it through the open blue door, and now she stood frozen on the porch board that always wobbled, looking from Royce to Eli, to the calm woman she had cried in front of 2 days ago, the woman from the safe-smelling classroom, the woman she had walked off a shift to thank, standing now in the middle of all of it like she belonged there, like she owned the place. "You?" Robin said to Nell, and her voice was full of a terrible dawning. "You? What is? Who are you?" And Nell Calloway, who had been waiting for this exact moment and dreading it, said the gentlest true thing she could find. "I'm Eli's teacher," she said. "And I'm so sorry, Robin. I'm also the person whose grandmother planted that lilac bush by the steps." She gestured very slightly at the kitchen, at the ghost of the yellow curtains, at the whole house full of someone else's life. "This is my house. I never knew you were here. He told me it was empty. He told you I wanted you gone. He told both of us exactly what we needed to hear, so we'd never say a word to each other." She swallowed. "You don't owe me a single dollar. You never did. Every cent you ever paid, you paid to him. What happened to Royce Mallard happened the way these things actually happen, which is to say slowly, and in offices, and with a great deal of paperwork, and without anyone shouting." Diane Okafor walked through the blue door 30 seconds later with a folder under her arm and a manner that made Royce Mallard understand, all at once, that the comfortable part of his life was over. Officer Pell came in behind her, unhurried, friendly even, and asked Royce if he'd mind stepping out to the porch to answer a few questions, and Royce, because men like Royce always believe right up until the last second that they can talk their way back to safety, went and talked and made it worse. His explanations fractured the way they always do once someone knows where to push. The vacancy reports collided with the cash he'd taken. The furnace he'd charged Nell $1,400 for had, it would turn out, never been so much as looked at by a licensed technician. There was no record, no invoice, no part. The fake notice he'd taped to the blue door. Robin produced it, folded and soft from being carried for days against her heart. Had a county seal on it that did not match any county seal that had ever existed. By the third follow-up question, the smooth warmth was entirely gone, and what was left was just a man on a porch with unsteady hands, watching the gap he'd stood in for 11 years close around him. It would take months. Fraud cases take months. There would be a forensic accounting because it turned out Nell's grandmother's house was not the only property Royce Mallard managed, and not the only owner he'd told a house was empty, and not the only family he'd kept on a leash. There were, in the end, 9 other addresses. 9 other people who'd believed they were getting away with something, who'd been taught to be grateful and silent, who'd been borrowing houses that the real owners had been told sat dark and empty. When Diane laid it all out for the state's attorney, the attorney went very quiet and then said the words pattern and predatory and restitution, and Royce Mallard's clean gray jacket did not help him at all. But that was later. That was the slow machinery of consequence grinding into motion, important and necessary, and not, in the end, the part that mattered most. The part that mattered most happened in the kitchen, after Officer Pell had walked Royce to the car, after Diane had stepped discreetly onto the porch to make calls, when it was just the 3 of them, Nell and Robin and Eli, standing in a house full of one woman's grief and another woman's fear and one small boy holding a tin of crackers. Robin Hale could not stop apologizing, and Nell finally crossed the kitchen and took both of the woman's hands in hers to make her stop. "Don't," Nell said. "Don't you dare apologize to me. You hear me? You did nothing wrong. You loved your son so hard that a thief built a whole machine out of that love. The only thing you're guilty of is being a good mother in a world that punished you for it. So no apologizing. Not in this kitchen." "But this is your house," Robin said, and the shame was coming off her in waves, the pride wrestling with the relief. The body of a woman who had never in her adult life been allowed to simply receive a good thing without paying for it twice. "We were living in your grandmother's house. We took down her curtains. Eli's been sleeping in, oh God, which room is? We have to go. I'll get our things. I'm so sorry, we'll be out tonight." "Robin, I just need a little time. I have a friend with a couch I can." "Robin." The woman stopped. Nell looked around the kitchen, at the place where the yellow curtains had hung, at the high cabinet Eli had been reaching for. At the table where, somewhere in her memory, she was 8 years old and her grandmother was telling her that borrowing and keeping weren't decided by the person holding the thing. They were decided by the person who owned it. And the person who owned it could decide differently than you'd expect. She had spent 2 years unable to walk into this kitchen because it was full of a dead woman. And then a frightened mother and a watchful little boy had walked in, and hung new curtains, and made dinner under the ghost of the yellow ones, and run through the hallway in pajamas with a chipped white mug, and the house had stopped being a grave. Somebody had been living in it. The thing she could not do, fill it back up with life, they had done for her in secret, paying a thief for the privilege. She had thought this whole time that she was the one rescuing them. She understood now that it had gone both ways. "You're not going anywhere tonight," Nell said. "You're not going anywhere this month, or this year unless you want to. There's no lease because there should always have been a lease, and I'm going to fix that. A real one in your name at a real and fair and frankly low rent, because I am a schoolteacher and I do not need to be rich. I need this house to have a family in it. And Eli is going to finish 2nd grade in my class living in this house, and next May, when that lilac bush blooms, the 2 of you are going to be standing under it." She heard her own voice crack and let it. "My grandmother would have liked you, Robin. She'd have liked you both very much. She hated an empty house more than anything in the world." Robin Hale put her face in her hands and finally let herself cry, the kind of crying that isn't grief, the rarer kind, the kind that comes when you set down something you've been carrying so long you forgot it was heavy. And Eli Hale, who had been standing very still through all of it with his tin of crackers, walked over to his teacher and tugged on her sleeve and asked the only question that, to a 7-year-old, actually settled the matter. "So," he said carefully, "is it a borrowing house or a keeping house?" Nell crouched down to his level, the way she crouched beside his desk every day, and she looked at his serious small face, and she made the most important ruling of her 19-year career. "It's a keeping house," she said. "You can put nails in the walls." He drew it again, of course. The house. He drew it that weekend at the kitchen table, with the good crayons Nell brought over because every keeping house needs good crayons. But he drew it differently this time. He drew the blue door and the crooked porch. Fixed now. Nell had paid an actual carpenter actual money to fix the board, and watched him do it, and felt something old and tight in her own chest finally come loose as the wobble went out of it for good. He drew the lilac bush, purple and enormous, taking up half the yard. And this time he drew his family inside the house. His mother in the kitchen. Himself in his room. And he drew a third figure in the doorway, a woman, and when his mom asked who that was he said, "That's Miss Calloway, she owns it but she lets us keep it." As though that were the most natural sentence in the world, which by then it had become. There were no suitcases on the lawn. Nell hung that drawing on the wall of the gray house herself, with a small bright nail, in the spot where her grandmother's wedding photograph used to hang. She let Eli tap the nail in. He did it very carefully, the way he did everything, holding the family mug in his other hand for luck, and when the picture was straight and steady on the wall he stepped back and looked at it for a long time, and then he looked at the nail, just the nail, the small permanent fact of it sunk into the wall of a house that wasn't going anywhere, and he said very quietly, almost to himself, "We're keeping it." In the spring, the lilac bloomed the way it had always bloomed, all at once, perfuming the whole of Linden Street for 2 reckless weeks. Robin and Eli stood under it the way Nell had promised they would. Nell came over with a thermos of coffee and the 3 of them sat on the porch on the no longer wobbly board and watched the blossoms come down, and a neighbor who had lived on that street for 40 years walked by and said, "Oh, the Calloway lilac's back. You know, I always wondered who'd end up in that house, it sat empty so long." And Robin Hale looked at Nell, and Nell looked at Robin, and the 2 of them started laughing and could not stop, and Eli looked between them with the patient confusion of a child who has decided that grown-ups are simply like this sometimes. Royce Mallard's case is still working its way through the slow machinery, and the 9 families are getting their leases and their dignity, and in some cases their money back. Diane Okafor will tell you it's one of the more satisfying files she's ever worked. Officer Pell will tell you he's never seen a fraud case crack open quite like that one. In a kitchen, with a tin of crackers on the counter. And Nell Calloway will tell you, if you ask her how she finally solved a theft that had run for years right under her own nose, that she didn't solve anything at all. A little boy did. A little boy who'd been taught his whole short life to expect to lose everything, who kept 2 crackers in his pocket in case, who drew his family standing on the lawn with their suitcases because he didn't believe houses were the kind of thing people like him got to keep. That little boy looked at his teacher one ordinary Tuesday and told her the truth he'd been told to never tell. He said, "We're just borrowing the house." He didn't know she owned it. He didn't know that one honest sentence would bring down a man and rescue 10 families and turn an empty grave of a house back into a home. He didn't know any of it. He just knew you weren't supposed to put nails in walls that weren't yours. And now they're his walls. And the drawing hangs straight on a single bright nail, right where the old photograph used to be, proof if you ever drove past and wondered that the house on Linden Street is not being borrowed by anyone. It's being kept. If this story moved you, if you believe that the smallest, most honest voice in the room is sometimes the only one telling the truth, and that the people we underestimate are so often the ones holding everything together, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Miss Calloway, standing in that hallway? And stay tuned, because the next story will surprise you even more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.